For me, I think that's the smartest thing to do. Rather than sitting down and feeling stuck in your problems, you get the help. You become vulnerable, you humble yourself, and you get the help. And you talked about most people not having the tools. And, it's true. You just have to look at the world and how the world is to realize that most people don't have tools that will help them to feel happy, healthy, and empowered. But there are many people who do, and it's important to seek out these teachers. As I said, if they can offer you services for free, go for it. If you have to pay, find the money, pay for it. It's important to pay it forward, what you've been taught, what you have learned, to share with others, to pay it forward, as they say. Tomorrow is really not promised to anybody.
What is it that I'm actually looking for?
Do we really know life?
But let me say intelligence. Emotional intelligence, social intelligence, financial intelligence.
So I believe it's important for each and every one of us to understand the rules that govern any arena of your life.
You are tuned in to Revenge of the Forsaken Gods, a podcast that seeks to uncover lost wisdom, things that we weren't taught by our parents, society, or schooling. For whatever reason, maybe they forgot, maybe they didn't want to share, or maybe they just didn't know. And I do this by exploring books, movies, and conversations with different people in an attempt to educate, inspire, and inform. I am your host, Andrew Balongo Opere. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew Balongo Opere, and I'm glad you're tuning in today's podcast. Today's podcast is very special. My guest is a wellness and leadership coach of the Main Protagonist coaching. She has worked with companies like Google, Safaricom, and Andela. She runs several workshops, and some of the workshops she runs are Return to the Feminine and Authentic Leadership for Men, among others. And an interesting fact about her is she has very many interesting stories of her transformation. And if she decides, she might even tell you that we met even way before we were born, if she chooses to tell that story. And without further ado, let me welcome my guest, Cece Ojany-Bekhor. Welcome, Cece.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm very honored to have you because you're a very difficult person to get because you're very busy helping clients all over the world. Before we start this conversation on how you started becoming a coach, there's something you shared on your page. You title it Sunday Funnies. You share that one of the ways I've measured my growth over the years is by how calm, optimistic, as opposed to panicked and pessimistic, I am when I'm faced with a challenge. This is an unusual and pressure-filled time for many, but my being serious isn't the cure. Being morose certainly won't help me help others. Being focused is not the same as being serious. Being productive is not the same as being serious. Being creative actually gets stifled by being too serious. Being open, being willing, traveling light. Being flexible and humble as opposed to rigid and proud. Letting go. These are some of the things that can get you through a tough time. It took me a long time to get this. Stay safe, stay creative, stay connected. What was it that inspired this post?
Well, thanks. Thanks again for having me, Opere. And let me start with my journey, maybe, and then you'll understand why I shared that post. I've had a very varied journey, for some people, professionally, that is. For some people, their journey is straightforward. They've had one or two jobs. They've stayed there for years, and that's perfectly fine. But then there's some of us who the road has been a bit windy. We're happy with where we've ended up, but it's certainly not been straightforward. So I was fortunate enough to have my parents send me to Australia for further studies many, many years ago in the year 2000. So I did my uni there. I actually went to law school I did a double degree. I studied the humanities, philosophy, sociology, international relations. And I really got an education in the humanities. I learned about life. I learned about the world. And that was when I realized that I am somebody who is interested in people. I'm interested in our history. I'm interested in our psychology. I'm interested in our behavior. I'm that person who, even at my age, I'm 39 years old now, but even at my age, I very easily make new friends. I love hearing people's stories. So after university, I was young. I was still trying to figure out what I'm doing. I joined the corporate world. I learned a lot from the corporate world. I'm really grateful for my experience in corporate. But I realized when I was there that I'm probably best suited for a different environment, an environment where there's less structure, less rigidity. And this is just a personality thing. Yes. There's some of us that really need the structure and the rigidity, and we like being part of large teams. I'm the opposite. I'm okay when there's no structure. I'm okay if I'm the one creating the structure. I like working in small teams. Right now, I'm a solopreneur. I really, really enjoy working by myself, for myself, partnering with business partners when I need to. So my journey has been very windy. And even as I was still working in corporate and in the SME space, because I left corporate and went to work for an SME in the organic food industry, even in those environments, I was still interested in people. I was still interested in talking to people, learning from people. And it's actually funny because when I was in corporate, I attended a training once. So this is in Australia. I attended a training once, and I remember sitting there looking at the trainer and thinking, that's the job I want. That's the job I want. I want to be that person helping other people get insights. I want to be that person having meaningful, great conversation with others. So that was when the light bulb went on that I should be doing something along those lines. I moved into the SME space. It was then that I had the time and the headspace to do further studies. So I got my coaching accreditation with the Life Coaching Institute of Australia. And when that was done, 2 years later, I decided to bite the bullet and start my own coaching practice. So I started off coaching Australians in Australia. Then I moved back to Kenya, where I'm from, and continued the coaching work here. And over the years, I have also received a lot of coaching. I got my first coach when I was 28. That was 11 years ago. And coaching has been the singular thing in my life that has really, really just helped me to feel empowered, helped me to stop whining and whinging and blaming other people for my challenges. I got a coach when I started my new business. I got a coach when I was pregnant with my daughter. Every time there's a challenge, my husband and I, when we hit a bumpy ride, a bumpy part in our journey, we speak to psychologists and counselors to help us out. And for me, I think that's the smartest thing to do. Rather than sitting down and feeling stuck in your problems, you get the help. You become vulnerable, you humble yourself, and you get the help. And if you can get the help for free, great. But if you have to pay for the help, go ahead and do that. And so right now, at the time this is being recorded, it's April, the year 2020. COVID-19 virus is pandemic is going on. We are we're physical distancing, I should say. We are working from home, limiting our movement. And a lot of people are really struggling with that. It has had consequences and repercussions for our personal lives, for our businesses. There are some people who are thriving, and that's really great. But there are many people who are struggling. And throughout my struggles, Andrew,
Yes.
my approach to my struggles has evolved over time. So as I said earlier, I was that person who was, constantly blaming, feeling like the victim. This was me in my early 20s. And then I got a coach. I became empowered. I believed that, yes, this is great. I'm empowered. I do have some form of influence over how my life goes. But then you get knocked around. So I got knocked around when my dad passed away. My husband's grandfather, when he passed away, I got knocked around. Just that realization that, wow, you actually don't have control. Before I was blessed enough to have my daughter, I had a miscarriage early on in a pregnancy, so that also knocked me around. So those are the things that took me to the next level of personal development, which is learning to surrender and accept and still feel empowered, even though you know at the back of your mind that you don't really have control. And when I did that, when I understood and realized that, Andrew, I was able to laugh more at my problems and to laugh more at difficulties. And it doesn't mean, when you laugh, it doesn't mean that you're not taking things seriously. It doesn't mean that you're in denial. Laughter, for me, laughter is the realization that, wow, isn't life interesting? Look at what's happened. I mean, just a month ago, all of us were making plans. We were making travel plans. We were, people were making wedding plans. People were making birthday party plans. And now all that has just stopped. And it's very humbling. And for me, it makes me laugh because, how arrogant were we all? Tomorrow is really not promised to anybody. So, and I had heard this being shared in, Buddhist philosophy. Different philosophies talk about laughter. And I couldn't understand it way back then, but I'm starting to understand, and I'm starting to see that when you start traveling light, you learn to laugh. And I tell you, Andrew, I've had some very serious conversations with people who have made me laugh. I have coached someone who is a COVID survivor, and she made me laugh. I mean, how amazing is that? I have coached people who no longer have an income because of the physical distancing, and they've made me laugh. They're still able to laugh at themselves. I've had people laugh at themselves after they've got divorced. I mean, there's something about laughter and humility. They go together, I think. So that's the reason I shared that post. And if you can remember the picture I put up, it was a picture of a cat looking very mangy.
Yes.
And the caption was, "The more I stay at home, the more homeless I look."
Yes.
And I just found that really funny. And I wanted to share that with people. I wanted to share with people that being serious is not the same as being productive. You can still be productive and lighthearted. For me as a coach, I can't afford to be morose. I can't afford to be a doomsdayer because that is not going to help my clients. So being optimistic and grounded and inspiring is very important for my own well-being, but also important for the people I'm working with. So that's a long way of answering your question about why I shared that post about the Sunday funnies.
But I'm glad you shared that, and I thank you for sharing that. And how do you travel light? Because you mentioned some very challenging moments. You said, you had a miscarriage, your father passed away, and you said your husband's grandfather passed away. In our regular life, we don't have tools to help us, or knowledge or wisdom to help us travel light. And how are you able to unpack traveling light in a practical way so you could start to laugh?
Well, it started off with, the very first coach I got. and her just not allowing me to take myself so seriously, because we get immersed in ourselves and our problems, and we don't see that, there are others with more hectic problems. There are others with more intense problems. We don't see that if you want to expand and grow, you have to go through a problem. We don't learn much when we're chilling on the beach and having a good time. Fun has its place. I love to have fun. It has its place, but so does stress and pressure. So my very first coach helped me out a lot, didn't allow me to take my problems too seriously, helped me to get my head out of, above the water and look around and see. My very first coach helped me understand that, when someone treats you in a way you don't like, it's rarely about you. They're also going through the stuff they're going through, and it's important to have compassion. So being coached, being a coachee is what has helped me learn to travel light, being given tools that I can use on my journey, tools to help me have a helpful mindset, to think healthy thoughts, practical behavioral tools to help me in my relationships, in my business, making mistakes. My goodness, if you want to be humble, start your own business. You will make so many mistakes. You'll embarrass yourself. You'll think your product or service is so amazing and no one will buy it, and you'll realize, I need to rethink things. All that is very, very humbling, and it allows you to take yourself less seriously, to travel light, as I said. And then, of course, there's the difficulties when you lose someone you love, when things don't go the way you had hoped, when you realize that, wow, I'm actually not in control. There's a world, a universe, galaxies around me. It's not just about me and what I want. All this really helps you to shed your baggage. But I will say this, though, it's a choice. It's a choice. Some people choose to let these sorts of experiences make them closed up and bitter. But that's a dark place that I am very clear I don't want to go down. I don't want to be a bitter person. I know what it's like to blame others. As I said, that was me in my 20s. And I don't want to go back there. So it's a choice. Whenever you're facing a challenge, you still have a choice about how to look at it and how to engage with it. And you talked about most people not having the tools. And, it's true. You just have to look at the world and how the world is to realize that most people don't have tools that will help them to feel happy, healthy, and empowered. But there are many people who do, and it's important to seek out these teachers. As I said, if they can offer you services for free, go for it. If you have to pay, find the money, pay for it. It's important to pay it forward, what you've been taught, what you have learned, to share with others, to pay it forward, as they say. So if you're lucky enough to have parents who are enlightened, maybe you'll get a download of these tools. If you're lucky enough to go to a school that is quite progressive and holistic in how it approaches education, that might help you as well. But we can't, again, we don't want to be in blaming mode. We don't want to blame systems, people, politicians. There's something to be said for taking 100% responsibility for how you want your life to go and doing what's necessary to get there. So seeking out teachers, reading a lot, not wasting your time on activities that don't really elevate you in some way, shape, or form. Taking personal responsibility is really important.
Wow, that's very powerful, Cece. And talking about looking for free resources, I do notice that you've offered in the past, I know things have changed because of COVID. Now a lot of workshops are being done online. But There are 3 workshops that stood out for me that I attended. Okay, sorry, 2 workshops I attended, but you've done 3 workshops, which is you've started a workshop for women, which is the return to the feminine. You started something for men, which is unheard of from all the coaches that I've seen in Kenya, especially the lady coaches. And even I remember some of the men were asking, what qualification does she have running a men's workshop? But your men's workshop was very powerful. And the last workshop I remember attending that was very impactful was about the Kenyan dream. So can you talk a little bit about your journey about how did you come with the ideas to do these 3 workshops, and how did they change your life? What were you hearing the attendees, what were they sharing when they came to your workshops?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking me about that. So my approach has been very strategic, and it was something, again, that I was taught by my business coaches, one of my business coaches in Australia, running events as a way of sharing your knowledge, sharing your gift. It's a marketing tool, a way of promoting yourself. And it has worked really well for me because I like, as I said, I'm really interested in people and I like meeting people. So the women's event, I used to start, let's begin from the beginning. I started off running mixed events for men and women on leadership and well-being. But the more I coached women, the more I coached men, the more I realized, this is now in the individual one-on-one sessions, the more I realized that there are certain things that keep coming up in the women's session, and there are certain things that keep coming up in the men's session. So I then decided to split and run a women's only event. And once I started running the women's only event, it did make sense to continue running the mixed event. So I had to split and just create a men's event. And I've really enjoyed, actually, I should say this, it was another business coach, this one in the UK, who he realized that I would do well as a coach for men. So I had been thinking it for a while. I started off coaching only women. I had been thinking about coaching men for a while, and one of these business coaches just said, Cece, you should think about coaching men too. And who knows, various reasons. I have quite a laid back personality. I get along with men okay. I don't tend to have drama. But more importantly, the content I was teaching applied to both men and women. There were just a few nuances here and there. So that's how the split ended up happening. But you see, Andrew, I don't think it's wise to do something like that without some prior experience. So the events came about after I had done quite a few one-on-one sessions, because the one-on-one sessions, individual sessions, helped me to realize what's on people's minds and what is the most important content to help them with. And for the sorts of people who come to my events and who come to me for coaching, they are leaders in their organizations. Leadership it's a privilege, it's a blessing, but it's not easy. They need help with that. They need somebody who doesn't have an ulterior motive or another agenda except to just help them succeed. And then because you're a human being before you're a leader, the wellness aspect also comes in. How can you look after yourself mentally, emotionally, creatively, spiritually, physically as a person? Because you need to do that first. Even if you want to lead, you have to be okay as a human being in order to lead well. So that's how those events sprung up. And it's been really wonderful. It's been wonderful being in a room full of women and talking about the things that matter to us. It's been really wonderful being in a room full of men and sharing with men, not just the perspective of women, but helping them to shift how they look at life, how they look at things. Women, as I think we can all agree, women are generally more prone to discussing our problems with one another. Not all of us, of course, but many of us. Not so much with men. We still live in a world where it's not that easy for a guy to just really go deep and be open and vulnerable. So the men's event has been really, it's been a privilege. I really enjoyed running it. Who knows what will happen if we are allowed to gather in groups again? The events will continue. If we're not, probably just take them online.
Yes.
We'll see how we go.
Yes, and maybe would you mind, if you're able to, maybe share like some of, you mentioned leaders have fears, and before they're leaders, they're people first. And I noticed in the men's workshop, you had a session where men shared their fears, and I'm assuming that you also maybe had a session for the women. Maybe would you mind sharing what were the general sentiments what are the things that women are scared of, and what are the things that men were scared of?
Well, it's, we don't really get into what we're scared of. We get into, what are the different things that challenge us?
Yes.
What confuses us? What are we not clear about? And to be honest, the themes tend to be the same because everyone, Andrew, just wants to be appreciated and valued for who they are. They want to be paid fairly for the work that they do. They want to feel purposeful. They want to be in relationships that are elevating, whether it's a personal relationship, an intimate relationship, or a professional relationship. The themes tend to be the same. The only difference comes in when you discuss the challenges that you face because you're a woman. So, for example, women are still paid less for doing the same thing. A man will say, this is how much I charge, and he will be paid that amount. But a woman with the same credentials or even more, when she says, this is how much I charge, we still have a bit of pushback. So we talk about such things. We talk about how women have been saddled with going out there, bringing home the bacon, but then also looking after the home. And that is work. It should be looked at as work. What time do women have just for themselves if they're working outside the home and working inside the home? So those are some of the unique things we discuss with women in workshops. Self-love and self-care is so important. The mentality of putting yourself last, women are starting to realize is not very helpful. If your cup is half empty and you're giving and giving, that's how you end up being depleted. And that's also how you get physically unwell, when you're not rested, when you haven't looked after yourself. And for men, of course, there's the pressure of being a what we call a success object. How much money are you making? How big is the car you're driving? And the need to feel connected and bonded to other men in a genuine, real way, rather than just always keeping it superficial, talking about sport, etc., etc. So the conversations are very interesting, very adventurous, but it all comes down to everybody just wants to feel valued. Everybody wants to be respected. Everybody has personal burdens that really frustrate them, and they just want some solutions, some tools, ideas around how to deal with that. Humans are humans, and I have clients overseas. My clients are not just Kenyans, and it's the same themes. There will be a difference for example, between a Kenyan client and a Belgian client, because the Kenyan client is also dealing with politics and all the issues that come with living in Kenya. Now, the Belgian client may not have some of those issues, or the Italian client may not have some of those issues. But on a personal level, I find that the issues are the same. And isn't that fascinating, Andrew? You know, it doesn't matter whether you're Italian, Belgian, or Kenyan. A lot of individual issues are the same across the board. It just tells you that humans are humans. We are the same everywhere we go. Our differences are superficial. Maybe you grew up in a certain culture where they do one thing and they don't do it in another culture. But deep down inside, I find clients are the same. And I run the same coaching program for local clients that I do with overseas clients. And it works for both.
That is a very interesting feedback. You know, we normally think that people in other countries, their problems are different from ours. But wow, it's good to learn that, I guess at the fundamental level, we all want the same thing, you know, to be valued, to be loved. And you mentioned something which I find is new vocabulary. I'd like you just to expand a little bit about it. You mentioned about self-love and self-care. What do those really mean?
Yeah, good question. What is self-love? What is self-care? A simple way to look at it is treat yourself the way you would treat your best friend. You know, somebody you genuinely care about, somebody who you want to see succeed, somebody who you want to be happy. Treat yourself the way you treat your best friend. You know, if your best friend came to you crying and he or she said, they're so tired, are you the kind of person who's going to say, come on, stop that, just, stop your whining, get on with it? You'd be pretty heartless if you did that. You would listen to your friend, you would comfort them, you might give them some hard truths, but you would be caring. But we find many of us don't treat ourselves that way. We're quite hard on ourselves, and that's not helpful. So treat yourself the way you would treat your best friend who you love and respect and appreciate. Do nice things for yourself. Give yourself permission to start those projects that have always been close to your heart. Give yourself permission to leave a toxic situation, whether it's personal or professional. Say yes to yourself more. You know, Andrew, one of the reasons why so many people are resentful of successful people is because they are not giving themselves permission the same way those successful people are giving themselves permission. You know, give yourself permission to run with that crazy, wild idea. Give yourself permission to rest when you're tired. Give yourself permission to go slow so that you don't burn out. Yeah, it's all about, for me, self-love is all about giving yourself permission and treating yourself well, having a reverence for yourself and your life. Your life is precious. You know, Andrew, when I had the miscarriage, I became so aware of the miracle that is your life. I started looking at myself even more differently. I started looking at my neighbors and just random people on the streets and just thinking to myself, wow, does this person understand that they made it? You know, you've made it this far. It's important to have a certain level of reverence and, deep respect for yourself and your life. And unfortunately, I don't think many people see their lives that way. You're a miracle. You're a walking, talking miracle. Take it from me. And let me tell you, Andrew, a lot of women have lost babies. Miscarriages happen more often than people think. You're precious. You're very, very precious. You made it. You're still here.
Thank you for sharing that. You've made me realize how we use that term loosely, the gift of life. And wow, you're right. Just looking at it through your eyes, everyone is here. They could have easily not been here. So it even helps me appreciate anyone and everyone. So I do thank you for sharing that. I know it must not have been easy, sharing about your miscarriage. I do thank you.
Yeah. I shared about it on a platform called Engage,
Yes.
engage.co.ke. There are a whole bunch of really amazing talks there. So I was invited to speak, and that was the story I shared. So people can go and click, do the search on YouTube.
Yes, what I'll do is I'll post it in the show notes. So whoever is listening, you please go to my blog after you're done. Listen to this conversation at revengeoftheforsakengods.home.blog, and I'll list all the resources that we've been talking about over here.
Great.
So
Send
yes, and your workshop, the Kenyan Dream, was so inspiring. It knocked me off my feet. What was the inspiration for that? And would you mind just sharing a little bit for those who did not get a chance to experience that workshop? Those 3 powerful questions.
So the Kenyan Dream was the brainchild of myself and another coach called Jane Katuga. You know Jane.
Yes.
And we were having a conversation around how, as Kenyans, we're always caught in this loop. Every election, we get tense, we get afraid. After the election, half of us are elated, half of us are not happy. What's going to happen now? Is there going to be violence? What's going to happen to business? It's just this loop that we keep getting into year in, year out. And Jane and I just felt that it's pointless talking about things as the what hits the fan. It's pointless to talk about it then. We should talk about things before, in the 5 or 4.5 years between elections. It's helpful to be having discussions around how we can care for each other more in a very real way. And it starts with what we think about ourselves as Kenyans, what we think of others as Kenyans, what's being said in our homes, what's being done in our offices, in our work. Again, this is about taking responsibility and not always pointing fingers at this politician, that politician. It's such a losing game, that one. People have been complaining about politicians for centuries. I'm sure back in the day, someone was complaining about Marcus Aurelius. You know what I mean? So it's we can't keep complaining. It's not very empowering. So the Kenyan Dream was just about, what is your dream for yourself? How can we make it happen, personally and professionally? So we got a chance to have some pretty cool conversations, and hopefully we can resurrect it once again when we get back to gathering in groups. The criteria for the event was no whinging, no whining, no complaining, just creativity, problem solving, and honest conversation.
Wow, and there were a lot of honest conversations, because it was funny, because I remember the very first question you asked was, what's your dream? And when you asked us to engage people outside of that forum, I remember when I was asking anyone, I was at school at that time, and I was asking my classmates, even the lecturers, and people were shocked because it's like no one had ever asked them that question before. And they took a moment, oh my God, no one has ever asked me about my dream. And what I love, what you brought to that conversation, if I remember correctly, the second part of the question was, you asked us what we love about Kenya.
Yeah.
And, people said so much, oh my God, Kenyans are creative. We're obviously one of the best long distance runners on the planet. Our food is awesome, the bomb, And, there were so many lovely things about Kenyans. But also you asked, what are the challenging things about Kenyans? And we listed the obvious things, things that don't work and what have you.
Yeah.
But the last part was the kicker where you showed us that my dream is connected to my environment. So I have to participate in my environment in order for my dream to happen, and my environment benefits. So it was really a kick in the gut because it stopped me from blaming and actually participate. That's why I found that conversation so powerful, and just having different Kenyans share their definitions, their dreams, their attitudes, it made me feel like a village, made me feel okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't think no one has ever asked me that in an inviting way that even lit my heart on fire to participate. Saying, okay, fine, how can I use my skill to benefit my environment?
Yep. Thank you so much for this, feedback. I know we've talked about it in the past, but it's really rewarding to hear you reiterate it again. And a lot of the work we did on the Kenyan Dream was based on the Ubuntu philosophy, UBUNTU. Ubuntu is such an African thing. I don't think we are the only ones who practiced Ubuntu. I'm pretty sure they did it in Asia, in South America. I mean, even in Europe, really, back in the day, the different traditions and communities and groups that were around. People were more conscious of the fact that we need each other. It's great to be individuated. It's great to be to get out there and chase your dream and to be this awesome individual. But the reality is, even the awesome individuals are being helped by others. So, and that's what Ubuntu is about. I am because you are. It's about we, us. You exist through other people. Yeah. So, for example, Andrew, if you didn't have anyone to interview, there would be no podcast. There would be no Revenge of the Forsaken Gods. If correct. I didn't have anyone to coach, there would be no the Main Protagonist coaching. So we exist in context. And I've had the privilege of traveling to many different countries and seeing what different people around the world are doing. And I remember going to Seoul in South Korea and learning about how the government supports entrepreneurs and thinking to myself, wow, wouldn't it be great if there was more of that happening in Kenya? Government support of entrepreneurs. Kenyans are very entrepreneurial. It's what I love about us. One of the many things I love about us. I have a client from Italy who told me, he doesn't have to worry about looking after his parents financially because they are now receiving government benefits. And I just remember thinking, wow, lucky you, because majority of Kenyans have to think about, oh, wow, how am I going to help mom and dad when they get older? And you see, those are extra pressures we have. And so that really is what the Kenyan Dream was about. It was about helping people to understand that you've got to be involved. You've got to be engaged. Yeah. If 5 of us are in a fish pond and 3 of us keep messing up the fish pond, that's just silliness because we're all in the fish pond. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. And the other 2 who aren't messing up the fish pond, it would be naive of them to say, well, I'm not messing up the fish pond, so I'm good. No, you're not good. We're all in the fish pond.
Wow, that's such a powerful
participation
metaphor.
Is important.
Yes, indeed. And you mentioned that in your travels to South Korea, the South Korean government helps entrepreneurs. How do they support the entrepreneurs?
I don't have all the details, unfortunately. You'd have to maybe do some more research around that.
Okay.
But you would travel to different suburbs and see all these quirky little businesses. And I remember asking my host at the time, how does such businesses survive? Like, I remember there was a lady who was just selling honey. That was all she was selling in her little shop. And it was him who told me that the government has funds for entrepreneurs.
Wow. I'll definitely try and check into that more. Yes, and we're about to come to the lightning round. I want to ask you 2 questions before we get into our lightning round. You mentioned that, you've been having a lot of sessions with your clients, especially about, how to go through this COVID situation. And you mentioned that you had a COVID survivor and they made you laugh. How did they make you laugh? And what was their story? If you don't need to share the details, but, what could we learn from that experience?
Well, I can't really share the details because it is a confidential, coaching is confidential. But just the person's attitude, their personality is just prone to humor. It was just a great session, and we just laughed about a lot of things. We laughed about life, we laughed about past experiences, laughed about some of the funny things people say when it's awkward or uncomfortable. We laughed about this person's strength and the things they did when they were in hospital. We just laughed. And the truth is, many people wouldn't find such things funny. But again, that goes back to, the connection between humility and laughter. There are 2 roads you can go down when you've been kicked in the guts. You can choose to be angry, bitter, and twisted, or you can move through it in an empowered way, feel all your feelings, and learn to laugh about it. And she chose to do the latter, which is really cool.
Wow, that's really powerful. And you've mentioned something interesting that will lead us now into our final section. You talk about how do you respond when you're being kicked in the gut. You could either look at it optimistically, or you could be bitter. And you also spoke about supporting each other. Would you mind mentioning 3 mentors that helped you in your career as a coach? Would you mind mentioning 3 failures in your career and what you learned from them about life and now that has made you stronger? And what would be 3 things you would tell your 18-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, so some of my mentors I've never actually met. So I'll share with you an example. I'll share with you about some of the mentors I've never met, and then I'll share the mentors that I have met. One of the most mind-blowing books I ever read was the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And the reason why that book just blew my mind is because it was the first book I ever read where the main protagonist himself, Malcolm X, was just very honest and open about how it's important to change your mind when you receive new information. It's okay to be passionate about something, but when you receive new information that behooves you to change your mind, you need to change your mind. And I found that very, very impressive. Also, the books by Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. That book has stayed with me because it was also a book where the main protagonist, herself, Maya Angelou, was just honest about her mistakes and unapologetic about them. So those 2 people taught me of how impressive and how helpful it is when you're just honest about your stuff-ups, and you own them and you move on. In terms of face-to-face mentors, my mom is a pretty amazing lady. The business, she's always running different businesses, and she has started even the most recent business she started, she did when she was, in her 70s. So my mom was is someone who just keeps going and going and going. So I just find that so amazing about her. Just, it wasn't an official mentoring relationship, but I get a lot of my drive, I believe, and my get up and go from my mom. My very first coach, a lady called Margaret. Margaret really helped me a lot with the information that she shared with me. Another mentor was a coach called Kemi. Kemi was my mentor for a brief time in Australia. She taught me a lot about business and, the importance of gratitude. She introduced me to her network of women. So I met a lot of women through her. So I think always having an attitude of wanting to learn will mean that the mentors and teachers come to you officially and unofficially.
Yes.
All my business coaches have been mentors as well. 3 failures. You fail a lot when you run a business. I remember my first ever event. You've been to my events, Andrew. Sometimes it's a packed house. But I remember my very first event that I tried to run in Australia, only one person signed up.
Wow.
And he was a relative of my husband, so it was a PT registration probably. Yeah, so that kept me humble. And it made me realize that, hey, I can think what I'm doing is amazing, but what's most important is what do potential customers and clients really think about this? Am I really serving their needs, or is this just an egotistical thing I'm doing? So remembering to always be of service is something that helps me in my business. When I was younger, I was sure that I would be in corporate for most of my life, but that wasn't to be the case. So I was really humbled when I stopped enjoying my corporate experience, and it happened quite fast. It forced me to stop and really think in my mid-20s, Cece, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do every day when you wake up, when you get into a car, a bus, a taxi, or whatever, and you're going to work? What do you want that experience to be about? So that's a quote unquote failure that, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And, just little failings every now and then, when I get into an argument with my husband, when I lose my patience with my daughter, it's there are always great opportunities for me to reflect, to look at my own behavior and to own what's mine. That was a mistake I used to make a long time ago, Andrew. I would own everything. I would blame myself for everything. But again, I've evolved in my personal development journey, and now I can say, actually, this is mine, and I'm owning it. But this is not mine. That's somebody else's thing to deal with. And this happens personally and professionally. With family, with friends. It's important to own what's yours, to apologize when you need to apologize, to correct whenever you need to correct. So I think we fail daily, and it's important to embrace it and laugh at it and grow and learn from it. There's a gentleman called David Kolb, Kolb, who talks about experiential learning. And he basically says, after you've had an experience, any experience, reflect on it. How did it feel? Was it great? Was it not so great? What worked? What didn't work? After you've reflected on it, think about what you want to do differently, what you want to start doing, what you want to stop doing. And after you've thought about it, when you have that experience again, apply the new ideas you've come up with. And then see what the experience is like after that. So I find that a really handy tool to use personally and professionally. 3 things to tell my 18-year-old self. That's a good question. I would say to my 18-year-old self, Cece, there's a grand plan. You need to just experience life. There is a grand plan. There is without doubt an organizing force in the world, in the universe. And, some people call that force God. Some people call it something else. But I've coached atheists as well, Andrew, and even atheists acknowledge that, look, there is some kind of organizing force at play here. So I would tell my 18-year-old self that there's a grand plan. Life is an adventure, and just enjoy and savor each day. I would have told my 18-year-old self to be more compassionate and kind to people, and to realize that everybody's going through some stuff. If you haven't been treated well, it's not necessarily because the person doesn't like you or love you. It's because they're going through their own stuff. And I would certainly say to my 18-year-old self, learn how to forgive. Learn how to forgive, and do it quickly and often, because hanging on to things just slows you down mentally and emotionally, and it makes you afraid of living life to the full. Learn how to forgive and have fun. You gotta have fun. When you look around at the universe is it's very whimsical, Andrew. I mean, one tree looks one way, another tree looks another way. Giraffes, lions, bears. I mean,
yes.
The diversity and the beauty and the quirkiness and whimsicalness. I don't think the earth takes itself very seriously. It just does what it does, and it does it really well, and it does it in a light-hearted way. But everything gets done, and that's food for thought.
Yes, it's interesting you say that. And let's move into the second part of our lightning round. Now, I like having my guests answer 3 movies they like, 3 books, 3 songs. Now, with the 3 books you already mentioned, Malcolm X, Autobiography, and Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So I guess you can just add one more to that. And 3 movies and 3 songs. It can either be old school or something you're listening to now.
Yeah. Another book I highly recommend is After the Ecstasy, The Laundry. After the Ecstasy, The Laundry by Jack Kornfield, Kornfield. It's a fantastic book. Jack Kornfield is an ordained Buddhist monk. He is American by birth, but he's traveled far and wide. And it's a fantastic book because he shares how even a Buddhist monk like himself and all his colleagues, they still have to live on planet Earth with all its problems and all their personal problems. And he makes a Buddhist monk very human, very accessible, very approachable. And I think it's important for people to know, even those who appear very zen, even those who appear very successful, they're humans and they're going through their own stuff. And the book shares different tools we can apply in our own lives to help us through some of the tough times. And the tough times are designed to make you better. That's a really important thing to remember. Yes. I also read a lot of fiction, though, Andrew. At the moment, I'm reading a series called Empire of the Moguls, which is a fascinating account of the Moguls from of the past, who they existed in present day India, I think Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkey, all those sorts of places.
Yes.
So that's the Mughal Empire. I don't remember learning about it in school, so I'm really enjoying learning about those guys and their adventures. The Taj Mahal is an example of Mughal inspired architecture. So it's pretty cool. I enjoy watching stand-up comedy. In terms of movies, the classic Matrix. The Matrix is and always will be a classic for me. So many messages, overt and covert, in that movie. You can still watch it again today and learn something new. But also it was just aesthetically very pleasing. Another movie which I found amazing was Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino, where he plays a blind former military officer. And I think his acting was just remarkable. I think he won the Oscar for that, actually.
Was it the one where there's a scene close to the end where he stands up for a boy in a boys' school and he gives this speech? Or that's a different Al Pacino movie.
It's the one where he was blind and he was being looked after.
Yes.
By the young guy. I've just forgotten the actor's name now. But it was a brilliant example of getting excellent in the work that you do. Because Al Pacino is not blind, but he played a blind guy. Yeah. And he didn't have shades on. It's very easy. I imagine it would be easier to play a blind man if you had shades on. But throughout the entire movie, he didn't have his shades on. So for me, and I watched that movie when I was very young, and I was very moved by the performances. And I just thought, wow, this is what it looks like when you've mastered your craft and when you're really good at what you do. So it's very inspiring. I'm really enjoying the shift that movies have taken now. Of course, I loved Black Panther. But I didn't just love Black Panther because it had dark-skinned people in it. I loved Black Panther because it was a successful action flick that didn't have gratuitous violence or nudity. And that tells you something about the world, Andrew. It really does, because for a very long time, Hollywood has been saying, no, we're giving you what you want. But there was no gratuitous nudity or violence in that film, and it grossed so much money. So that tells you something about what people want. People just want a good movie. You don't have to throw in a naked woman in there or some, gory murder scene to get people's attention. In coaching, we say to people, be very careful what you're watching and what you're reading, because that will influence your beliefs about the world. So you want to keep it healthy. So those are some examples of movies that I really love. There's so many more I could mention. In terms of songs, wow, my playlist is very varied. I am listening to Gurumul, Gurrumul. Gurumul is an Australian. He's also blind as well. An Australian Aboriginal singer, vocalist, guitarist. His albums are just they're wonderful, and I highly recommend you listen. It's just very soothing. He's got an amazing voice. Of course, I love listening to some of the oldies but goodies like Lauryn Hill, D'Angelo. Loving the Afro beats. And listen, I do love hip hop as well. I find the stories of successful hip hop artists quite remarkable. Those men and women have lifted themselves up from poverty and difficulty to become the sorts of human beings that influence the world. And that's quite a remarkable feat. Say again?
Anyone in particular you want to name?
Gosh, there's so many. The late Notorious B.I.G., Kendrick Lamar. There's Common. I love listening to those guys. Your Erykah Badu's. I'm quite fascinated by the story of the Wu-Tang, for example. I think the RZA is quite amazing, just in terms of how he thinks. I'm really interested in people who exercise their polymathic, they express, I should say, their polymathic personalities. I find such people quite interesting. But from a coaching perspective, Andrew, anybody who takes themselves from poverty to being an influencer globally, that's somebody who might have some information to share with us about mindset and behavior.
That's true.
Yeah. And then, of course, I listen to a lot of jazz. I like Miles Davis and John Coltrane. I listen to a lot of jazz.
Wow. That's a very eclectic mix. And
and of course, Afrobeats.
Yes. Any particular artist, or you just search for Afrobeats selection?
Where do I begin? There are just so many. Davido, Diamond Platinums, Burna Boy. There's just so many, you know. Sure. Yemi Alade, Ali Kiba, there's so many. And of course, reggae. I mean, listen, we could go on and on and on.
Yes.
We could go on and on and on. But reggae-wise, I like listening to Kofi, K-O-F-F-E. My husband and I love music. It's something that we enjoy in common. So at any given time, there's a different tune playing in our house, and our little daughter seems to like it too. So that's cool.
Yes. And now, with the name, how did you come up with the name, The Main Protagonist?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking. The Main Protagonist is the name given to the lead character. It's another way of saying the lead character in a story, be it a movie, be it a book. And I selected that name because I value creativity. Not just in the fine arts, but also creative thinking. And I just want people to know that you are the main protagonist in the story of your life. Take the lead role. And I'll share with you an interesting story, Andrew. In the early days of my business, an Australian lady came up to me and said, this was after an event. And she said, the name of your business really got me thinking. And I said, what were you thinking about? And she said, I've been the sidekick for too long. Whoa. It's time for me to be the main protagonist in my own life. And that was the day I said, yep, we are sticking with this name. It's a mouthful, themainprotagonist.com. But what that lady said to me that day, Andrew, it has stayed with me. I mean, this happened many years ago. She said she's been the sidekick for too long. She's always the person helping the main protagonist with their projects. She's afraid of starting her own things. She's always the helper, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And I'm happy to say this lady, we stayed in touch later, and she did start her own thing. She did start her own projects and her own businesses. So I mean, it's powerful to think about it that way. You're the lead character in your own life, and never forget that.
That is so very powerful. And, with a name like that, we have to finish it off this way. Then who are your 3 favorite heroes, 3 favorite villains, and 3 favorite stories?
You mean just across
the board,
the books and movies I've mentioned?
Yeah, across the board, yeah. Specific heroes, villains, and stories.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't have 3. I just have one of each.
Okay, sure.
My favorite superhero is Batman, and I'll tell you why. It's because Bruce Wayne doesn't really have any superpowers. He's just a regular dude who has used the power of his mind and his physicality to do some interesting things with his life. And I think a lot of people forget that. A lot of people forget that Batman doesn't actually have superpowers. So I really appreciate that about him. And my favorite villain is his arch nemesis, the Joker. The Joker from the comic books, not the Joker from the movies. The Joker from the comic books is such a fascinating character from a psychological perspective, because Batman and the Joker are 2 sides of the same coin. Everybody has a superhero and a supervillain within them. And depending on the choices you make, you're either being one or the other. But quite apart from that, I just love the Joker's sense of humor.
So how is a Joker opposite to Batman? I thought there were two different kinds of people, but you're saying that they're two sides of the same coin?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, ask yourself this question: why doesn't the Joker ever get eliminated? He just keeps coming back, and it's symbolic of many different things. Like I just said, everybody has a superhero and a supervillain in them. It just depends on the choices that you make. At every moment you're at a crossroads. You can go left, you can go right. So, for example, right now during COVID-19, Andrew, anyone who's running a business needs to get money from their clients and customers, right?
Yes.
Are you going to be self-centered and self-absorbed and demand to be paid what you're owed? Or are you going to practice compassion and empathy and think of the big picture? Are you going to tell a lie, or are you going to tell the truth? I mean, at various moments throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, you're being invited to be the hero or to be the villain. And I read a very fascinating and thought-provoking quote, and it said, I hope I say this correctly, it said, when you're young and naive, you're cheering for the superhero and you're blaming the supervillain. But as you get older, you start to understand the villain. The villain has a backstory. The villain wasn't born that way. He or she was made that way. There's a reason why the Joker is never eliminated. There will always be that energy exchange in the world, I believe. There will always be, and it's not even a battle between good and evil. It's just an acknowledgement that you have some good days and you have some crappy days. I love the complexity of those two characters because I tell you what, Andrew, nobody is perfect. Everybody, even me, I have my dark moments. And that was something in my early 20s I used to be ashamed of, and I used to try and hide it away and try really hard to be this good, decent person and feel so much shame, for example, if I ever got angry or irritated or said a sharp word to someone. But now I'm older and I understand the villain. Life happens. Things happen. Yeah. There's no darkness without light. Yeah, night, day, up, down, left, right. Happy, sad. There's no darkness without light. But I also just love the Joker's smart mouth. He's just so. There's a scene. My favorite Joker in terms of movie character. My favorite Joker was Heath Ledger. The late Heath Ledger executed that role so brilliantly, and. I lived in Australia for a long time, so Heath Ledger is somebody you'd hear about a lot in Australia. There's a scene in, I think it was The Dark Knight. Yeah, Heath Ledger was the Joker in The Dark Knight.
Yes,
and there's so many thought-provoking things that the Joker says. When he says things like, the city needs a better class of criminal. And I laugh every time I hear that line because I agree. I mean, my goodness, if you're going to be a dodgy politician or a dodgy, come at me with something interesting. Let it not just be basic greed, for example. Let it not just be, I want to own everything. I want to run everything. That's boring, right? So I just find he's the things he says reveals somebody who's thinking. Of course, he's using his abilities in an unhelpful and destructive way.
Yes.
But I just want to emphasize, there's a reason why the Joker doesn't die. that energy will always exist on the planet. And it's about how we choose to engage with it. Do you want to be someone who pretends it's not there and you sugarcoat everything with positive thinking? Or do you want somebody who focuses only on the negativity? Or do you want to be somebody who is evolved in your thinking and you look at Batman, you look at the Joker and you go, yes, I am both those things.
Wow.
Both those things exist. Both those things are present in everybody. Yeah, nobody is perfect. Even our modern day real life heroes. Andrew, whenever some scandal appears, I'm so much less judgmental. I used to be very judgmental. I'm not as judgmental as I used to be, and it's something I keep working on. I just go, yep, that was not a smart thing to do, and you're gonna get what's coming to you. But I don't pretend that I'm better than others, and I'm this innocent, pristine angel. I'm not. I'm human. Yeah.
Yes, it's really humbling. It's easy to blame the villain, but it's like, hey, we all live in the same place. What has created the villain to be who they are?
Yeah, exactly. Great.
Wow. So I think I can let go the favorite stories, because you've told a lot of stories.
I've shared quite a few. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for listening and inviting me.
Sure. And if my listeners or anyone who's hearing this podcast would like to reach out to you just to have a conversation, just about anything, how can they reach out to you?
They can go to the website, www.themainprotagonist.com. I also have a podcast where I share a lot of free content on wellness and leadership. You can go to soundcloud.com/coach_Cece Ojany. I remember you saying you would include it in the notes, so please go ahead and do that.
Correct.
And you can contact me through the website. There's a page, a contact us page. So go ahead and click on there. If you would like me to run a training for your team, for your organization, please get in touch. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching to help you lead your team, to help you with well-being, please do get in touch.
Yes. Please do get in touch with Cece, as in it will be worth your time. And are some of the workshops that you're having right now on Zoom, are they free? How can they how can they see more of that so they can get involved and listen?
Yeah, currently the workshops are open and they're free on Zoom. Normally I'll share on the website, but you can also go to Eventbrite, EVENTBRITE, eventbrite.com. You can search the Main Protagonist. I'll show up there, and you'll be able to see any event that's coming up. I ran an online class today with an entrepreneur here in Nairobi. That was really great. We're doing one on nutrition on Thursday with an amazing pharmacist nutritionist. So they can go to the Main Protagonist coaching. They can enter that in the search bar, and all the events that I'm running on Eventbrite platform will show up there.
All right, that's wonderful. And before we sign off, I haven't yet revealed how I came with the title of my podcast. So I'd like to ask my guests, what do you think it means? What does it mean to you after having this conversation?
Revenge of the Forsaken Gods.
Yes.
Well, gods, this idea of gods and goddesses are used in mythology. And mythology is a really beautiful, complex way of teaching people. If before writing, before we were writing books and all of this, we were telling stories to help people learn. And so anytime there was a lesson to learn, you would share a story, but a story needs to be interesting in order for people to listen to it. The story needs to be interesting. So it's important to talk about, gods, goddesses, main protagonists, and all these sorts of things, the hero, the villain. So for example, in the story of Narcissus, the word narcissism, there's a god called Narcissus who he fell in love with his own reflection, and that led to all sorts of problems. So the lesson there is, don't be self-absorbed, don't be narcissistic. I think there are many gods that have been forgotten and forsaken, and by gods, I just mean ways of behaving, ways of thinking, and mythology is very helpful. And there are different mythologies from different parts of the world. Doing your research and finding different stories / myths will give you an idea about what our ancestors felt was important enough to teach and capture in the form of a story. And I think a lot of those forsaken ways of being, forgotten ways of being, are starting to come back. This is their revenge for being forgotten. That's what I think Revenge of the Forsaken Gods means, but I could be completely wrong.
I like that. I like that attempt. And like every good story, this has to come to an end. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And if you have liked this conversation, please like, subscribe. I will be posting this up on YouTube, on Anchor FM, or any place where you listen to your podcasts. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and the rest. And please do give us feedback. You can share what works, what I could improve on. But if you're going to share that, please do share one thing that you've learned as a result of this conversation and what you can apply to your life, so that you can let me know if I have achieved my goal of giving you an inspiring educational experience, an informational experience. You can do that by sending me a voice message or a voice note. And this can be found in the description wherever you have listened to this podcast, either on YouTube or any of your preferred podcast platforms. I shall also be providing small clips of the whole conversation if you're not able to listen to the full conversation now, and these shall be also available on YouTube. Thank you for listening to Revenge of the Forsaken Gods, and I will see you next week. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.